everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of Client Horror Stories, and I'm very excited to have Violet on today. No, not Violet from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I always mix that up. And we were just chatting before, and she has a great story. Let's jump right in. Violet, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to attend to share my horrors with everyone.
So that we can make mistakes so that others can learn from them and hopefully make different mistakes.
I am terrific at making mistakes. So yes, yes.
So
someone should learn from
yes. So let's talk about today's mistake. What's first tell us the context of the story and then what happened.
Well, what's interesting about this particular client that I wanted to discuss is it was just a storm of little things that built up along the way that made it just absolutely miserable to support this client. And one of the biggest pieces was that they were a third of the company's revenue. So this company had many clients, but they had this big fish that was a third of their revenue. And so they got pushed around a lot. They did set up some processes and take advice from the client, which worked sometimes, but a lot of times it just helped us lose money and self-respect. It was difficult supporting this particular client.
You know, this is a good preface to the story because it's always a dangerous. I'd say the main client isn't a fish, it's a whale, and the danger or the risk of having a whale client is it's so easy. Like they know they're a third of your revenue, so they can so easily pressure you and take advantage of you. And one of the business challenges of any agency or any small business is to diversify your number of clients.
Right. Well, and the company was really happy to have this client because name recognition is huge. And they could tell their other clients or prospective clients that, oh, well, we're already working with this particular company and they have 3,000 different sites and we're able to support that. So of course we could handle your shop of 600 stores. It was a good way to sell, but being the account manager was, it was brutal. It was really brutal.
I think because I like the meta-analysis before we jump into the meat. That what's interesting is that clients, so it's who are not just whales, but who have name recognition. They know they have name recognition, so they can use that to their advantage to constantly renegotiate and get better terms and more work for free and lots of other fun things that people think they can get away with because they often do get away with it.
They do. And you know what? What's interesting is we're talking about a company, but we're talking about 50 or 70 different contacts that I had at that company that all pulled this shit, all pulled this attitude, right? And all pulled this, like pushed us around because they could, because they knew that was the dynamic. So it was difficult to deal with because it wasn't like, oh, wow, this client's really terrible. It's like, I would say 70% of the people I was dealing with were just unkind and difficult.
What's good about the buildup is it's getting me excited. It's whetting my appetite for the meat that's about to come. But that's also a good point because often what happens in these horror stories, there's one bad person. You get a bad CEO and he makes it miserable for everyone, or a bad account manager on the other side. But when you have a culture where it's three-quarters of the people are like this, like then it makes a terrible situation unsavable.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I wasn't exaggerating by saying that I was dealing with 50 different people, because on my way out from this, when I got a new position, I had to basically document and keep track of every person that I dealt with and what we worked on together and their contact information. And there were nearly 70 people that I dealt with over 2 years. And a vast majority were just not fun to work with. But it really taught me a lot of patience. So if I'm going to look at the bright side, it was like account management boot camp. I even told that to the CEO when I left. I was like, thank you so much for this opportunity. I feel like I have had 15 years of account management experience because I worked that many hours. I'll tell you that I worked that many hours. It was insane. It was one of those 12 to 14 hour day, maybe had a Saturday off, always worked the holidays because a lot of stores, retailers are open 24/7, 365, right?
It definitely sounds like a good learning experience. So that is a euphemism. Let's jump in. What's the context, and then what happened?
Well, I think one of the really good examples is when dealing with the procurement team. And you actually mentioned, I think you already mentioned working with procurement. And they're like getting you down to the very slimmest margin, right? They did that to us so frequently that we were bleeding out because we would work on these projects, and not only were we giving them bargain, based on bargain prices for all of our services and products, but they were also refusing to pay us in certain scenarios. Let's say that a technician was on site for longer than they were supposed to be. Let's say that this issue would take 1 hour to resolve, yet the technician was on site for 2 hours. Well, because there were multiple problems, right? And they would refuse to pay for those 2 hours. They would pay the one hour agreed. But there were so many of those issues that we're just losing so much money. And it was very difficult to argue against that because our contracts weren't necessarily in the place to protect us, in my opinion. We didn't have a legal team. That probably hurt us.
Okay, so there are a couple of useful gems in there. Let's take them out. First, the importance of good contracts and a legal team. I think this is a classic problem that small businesses have because you don't yet have the money to hire a big fancy lawyer. But when you get a huge client, then every line in the contract they're going to take it to their advantage. So I think the lesson is when you get big clients, it's worth it to splurge for lawyers, even if you think you don't need it. But I feel like that lesson, while obvious, it's so easy to miss because you don't realize what's happening as it's happening.
I'm guessing that this company I worked for just didn't get sued a lot. I mean, otherwise they would, or didn't have to fight for their contract language to stand up. I don't know. It just seemed strange that we were never really engaging a legal team or a legal contact. Whereas, and I know that now because I'm in a position where we have a huge legal team, and you check with legal on pretty much everything, right? Any contract question the client's trying to push back, you're like, well, let me check with legal, and we didn't have that. And it was more like, well, let me check with the CEO. And he made decisions based on emotion, based on wanting to keep this client happy. So I mean, I guess that's maybe logical.
Yeah. So to go back to the procurement. So one lesson is the importance of lawyers. Another lesson is there's like always how much you're paid in theory versus how much you're paid in reality. So in theory, it's, the technicians get X dollars an hour, but if procurement in practice manages to not pay you for half of the hours, you're effectively getting paid at 50% of the rate. And I think a lot of people think about the on paper official rate, not the real world rate of what they're actually putting in.
Right. And if they wouldn't pay us for that extra hour, we're still paying our technicians, right? So even though, yes, we did mark up the cost of labor on per hour, it wasn't really enough if they only decided to pay us for 1 hour and the technician was there much longer.
Yeah, and when there are like thousands of technicians and sites and procurement only paying for half of them, it's like suddenly that eats away at the money very, very quickly. And before we move to another aspect, or the next aspect, tell us a bit about your experience dealing with procurement, because a lot of people that run small agencies or small companies don't even know what procurement is.
Oh, okay, can I just one moment?
Yeah, I will use this opportunity to swig some water as well. You need the internal strength to get ready to talk about procurement.
I just get a little bit of a scratchy voice, and that never sounds good on a podcast. So, so procurement tends to be a department within a corporation that manages all contracts as far as new work and new opportunities, new projects, new vendors. They are the ones that will negotiate the pricing. They'll negotiate the red lines within the contract, and they tend to be hard line. And it's interesting because they are, let's say that I have a client and I deal with their, let's say their IT department all the time, and all of the, even the CIO I'm dealing with, but I don't get to talk to the CIO if I'm dealing with procurement. They're the ones who are, they act as the mediary. They don't allow me to go to the CIO and say, we want to give you the best price, but you're pushing hard on us. You can't really have that conversation with procurement because they're just ice cold. They don't care. They are just trying to get the best deal for the company that they're representing, which is their job, but it makes it difficult for smaller companies to, be, I don't know, competitive or even get work.
Because the department that you work with, they see the value, they see how awesome you are, and
Yes.
they see how you work, and to procurement, they look only at the cold cash and their job. It's a whole department to be as cheap as possible.
Yeah, it's it's a brilliant strategy. It's a great way to set up a business if you don't want people making decisions based on relationships, I guess, personal relationships or even working relationships.
Okay, so procurement beware. That's the lesson. The red line from the procurement section.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the core work that you did as the account executive. What was it that made dealing with this client so particularly painful?
Well, I think it was definitely the client, but it was also the way that the company I worked for set up the role, because they were responsible for every single pillar of business under this client. And this client had new store construction, they had break fix, they had software rollouts, they had special events, they had all these things that were broken down into huge departments, and yet one account manager was supposed to orchestrate and support all of it. So any problems would shoot up from any of those areas, and it just made for a very long to-do list and a very long engagement with the vendor manager. The vendor manager was probably at the end of things. I started to like him, but man, when we first worked together, he made my life a living hell. Like that task list was like 70 items long. And I'm like, I don't know when I'm ever going to get to do this and make these improvements, where he's trying to make us strategic, but then I'm getting all of these tactical items that I can do nothing about, except for share with the CEO. So I needed a lot more support, I think, as far as the role. It should maybe be split across several account managers. I think that probably would have been more productive and maybe a better experience with the client. Maybe I'm a little jaded because I just spent so much time and energy and still felt like I never quite got up that hill, never accomplished anything.
Okay, so like let's unpack it, because I think there are a few important points in that. First, it sounds like you had the job of like 4 different people. So while part of this is saying, wow, the client was a disaster, and like 75% of the 70 people that you work with were disasters, it also sounds like your boss and your company could have had 4 different people, but you're so competent, they piled it all on you, making your life miserable.
Well, that was the role when I started. So I think that's just how that was the format that they had for account managers, right? No matter the size of the client, they're going to have one account manager. We did have a program manager, and that program manager reported to me, and then had several project managers reporting to him. And I then had other direct reports that worked as contractors for this client. So not only did I have to deal with client-facing issues, but then I had a whole team to try to help develop and manage. And they were actually sitting in the client's offices, doing work inside the client's offices, which made it very, very, could be very awkward, but also very interesting, because we had that like we would find out certain things because we were in those offices. It was just such an unusual relationship, not one that I was used to, at least.
So I think a good one of the lessons there is companies often define roles in certain ways. This is what the account manager does. But as the company grows, or you have clients that are different than your usual, you have to change the role in order in order for the client. So it sounds like as part of the breakdown, one of the problems on your company side was that role wasn't changed, and instead more and more piled on you. I think a second point to come out of what you're saying is the vendor manager giving you a never-ending task list. And this is actually, oh my God, I can like.
He was never happy. He was never happy.
So this is actually a really good one. And what's good, I like some of your points. I haven't come out in the previous podcast, including this one, and I like it. And I feel like task lists are like fundamentally overwhelming for anyone, because it kind of takes away your humanity. Hey, you are a robot. Here are 400 things that you just need to be a robot and complete. And to add to that, it just like the never ending, always growing. It turns from you losing your humanity as a robot to you feeling overwhelmed and in a no-win situation.
And it doesn't allow you to be strategic. Like, my role was supposed to be strategic, get more, have the clients engaged and happy, and secure more projects, secure more work, any type of opportunity. We were open because it was a technology company, retail technology, that I worked for, and the world was very large as far as what they could help this client do. They could help at their particular stores, but they could also help at their corporate offices. So there was a lot of potential for that relationship. And I completely agree with you. If they had changed the account manager role and maybe developed a few more areas of support, it probably would have improved, definitely my experience, but also just even the relationship with the client, and probably our ability to be more productive. So
that makes sense. This is a good one. I like the warning of never-ending task lists. I've seen it with myself, where it like leads to like my own feeling of blowing up. Question. So far, from the ears of the listener or the eyes of the viewer watching this podcast, for like what they've heard so far is, okay, you have a big client who wouldn't pay for all of the hours and give you a really long task list. So while those are frustrating, it's not yet the painful experience that, or they haven't yet heard what the pain that you've been through. And I always think that what's powerful about the examples, little examples, a little thing blew up, this little thing blew up, this little thing blew up, is that's where the best and the strongest lessons come through. So you have a difficult client, wouldn't pay, gave you a big task list. Do you want, maybe we can talk about some specific moments in the dealing with them, because that will make the lessons very vivid.
Totally agree. And I do have some specific, several specific moments for you.
Let's go. You need some more water to prepare for the stories. I'm going to take some too.
So one specific example is around the project management of their seasonal activity. Basically, they needed more equipment in their stores in order to make more sales, serve more customers, that kind of thing. So my company was selected to basically install that equipment to make sure it's running, make sure it's up, the whole maintenance piece, send back broken things, send back fixed things, make sure that those that get installed. It was just a lot of little moving pieces to the business of, equipment and inventory. And anyway, already stressful time, right? The holiday season. And we got a little behind on a project, and the program manager that I had at the time went out, leave of absence, the day before the client realized that we were very, very far behind on the project. Like we had probably, I don't know, maybe 700 sites left to roll out to, and we certainly did not have that number. I mean, we had like a handful of project managers that were supposed to handle each and every site in detail, to make sure the technician get there. Did they install? Did they have any issues? Did they, checklist down? And with this program manager stepping out, I had to step into that role. So I essentially was overarching, trying to run this project. And the client came to me and said, can you please tell me if your company can really do this and accomplish it in the next 3 days? And seeing my project managers, how stressed out they were, how miserable they were, and how they were already working more hours than they should have, I said, I don't think we can do it. I don't think we can do it. So they brought in another vendor to help support the opportunity or the project of the rollout of this equipment. And I got into a lot of trouble with the CEO and the VP of operations. They were so unhappy with me because I allowed another vendor into the relationship. But I knew we were going to fail. I knew that we still managed to fail by, I don't know, I think we got up to like 75% ready to go once it was Black Friday. But we still had a bunch of sites that just did not have the equipment they needed. And I spent a lot of time working on reports manually to share with the client about each one of these visits. We're at X percentage of completion. We have these kind of problems at these sites. It was very detailed, but also very manual. I ended up working a 36-hour workday.
36-hour workday.
Because and that was when that project started. And can you imagine if I said, yeah, we can handle it? I don't even know, it probably would have killed me. But the reason I worked so many hours is I stayed up all night trying to get this manual report together for each and every site that we visited, that we installed equipment at. And I had two people helping me, but given the number, the sheer number, we had to go into the system and check to see what the status of the visit, you know, what happened, was it completed? It was just so manual, which maybe stems back to, we definitely needed better software to maybe do that type of reporting. But yeah, we were essentially acting as the computers. And you know what, I want to say that not necessarily the client's fault here. So even though it is a horror story of, it was an awful experience and our, you know, employees felt really abused, it could have been managed. I think that once again, the company that I worked for, they just didn't have a close watch on the project that was going downhill. And also, unfortunately, I mean, you know, maybe the main issue is there weren't the right people in the roles, and there weren't enough people in the roles to support what this client was asking us to do. So I guess I'm discovering that it's really not the client, it's been this company this whole time that has made my life, well, admittedly, yeah, I knew that company was working, it was very hard on me, but I took it all out on the client because it was, you know, directly related to the client.
Wow, that's a powerful and an important realization. The worst client horror stories tend to be the ones where the client does something bad, maybe out of naivete, or maybe they're an asshole, but then you or your company or pressure from your company responds in a way that makes it worse, and then they respond. So the two feed off of each other. So the worst client horror stories is actually at least 50% about yourself and your company as well. Yeah, I just think client and my own horror stories is just less catchy than client horror stories. But I want to make some observations on what you just on this instance that you just shared. First, wow, I'm glad I was in your position, but that's pretty powerful. Like having to work a 36 hour day with this enormous pressure of like a massive rollout by Black Friday, massively behind and so on. And on top of that, what's difficult about that for you is you're in a no-win situation because you know that the company will fail unless you say yes, bring in another vendor. But if you bring in another vendor, massive competition because like your competition has the in to come in. So like there's no way out for you.
I was in the middle of that horror story of trying to gather all details around these visits, you know, doing this manual work, and the VP of operations calls me and chews me out. She's like, did I hear that you told this client that we weren't going to be able to finish this project, or we needed some help? And I was like, yes, and because that is true. Your project, your program manager just went on leave of absence, and she's the one that was kind of running the show. She has the most experience, and unfortunately, she wasn't doing a great job, and that's why they got so behind on the project. But probably due to some of the leave of absence, you know, she needed a break. I mean, she was just completely exhausted. But anyway, right in the middle of me pulling my hair out, she calls to chew me out about letting the client go to another vendor. And once I got off the phone, I burst into tears, and I told my husband that I was done. I was going to quit this job. And I mean, I was like ready. I would have had more of a, I don't know, maybe an 18-hour day rather than a 36-hour if I would have quit then when I, you know, flipped out. But my husband, of course, is like, well, let's sleep on it. I didn't sleep on it. I stayed up all night and worked on this shit. And yeah, I mean, I came to terms with the fact that there's just no quitting your job. If you live in the Bay Area, that's not gonna, you just can't do that easily, as easily, maybe. Especially if you don't have great savings like myself.
Right. It's so question, when you told your boss and the CEO and these VPs at your company that you would never make it, and you probably raised the alarm bells to them earlier, how come they, because it was fundamentally their responsibility to say ideally not at this point, but earlier than this, oh, we're not going to make it, we need to put more resources in or something else. Why do you think that never happened?
We had already pulled so many resources from each potential area that could actually support, because we had a call center that actually would support the technicians calling in. We would support the store managers calling in and trying to troubleshoot equipment. And, it would have been great to have a big team of those individuals to be able to maybe do the project management piece, but it was right in the middle of the hot, season, and we were slammed. There were no additional resources. I am probably at fault for not running to them immediately and acting more out of desperation by answering the client quickly on, get us some help, rather than trying to connect with the VP of Ops or the CEO when they were free, to have this conversation about whether or not we can support this project that we're already far behind on. I guess I made a decision that maybe they could have supported, maybe they could have given me better advice on how we should keep the entire project to ourselves. I just didn't see it. I didn't see it, so I didn't ask.
Wow. And it also feels like a powerful example of when companies get in over their head, where like if the company was already pulling in all of these resources, then everyone's working at max, there's this optimism. Oh, we can pull through. We're working hard. We just need to work hard for another week, and then we can do it. But sometimes that's just not possible.
It's not, and I felt like this because the VP of Ops was so disappointed in me and called me out on it. I was like, oh man, I really messed up. That I should have never made that, that quick decision. But I had the client breathing down my neck, and they were like, do we get another vendor involved today? Because this stuff needs to be done tomorrow. I didn't feel like I had that space to ask, but I also probably reacted emotionally, because I was out of desperation. Anyway, that little act of desperation cut into my annual bonus that year. That was the reason that I didn't get my full bonus, and they cited that as a reason.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's it sounds like the assholes weren't only at the client company, but at yours as well.
Yeah. Well, they were also just very frugal, perhaps. I don't know. Yeah, it was painful.
Yeah, so this is a powerful example of why this situation was a disaster in all directions, and we got a few lessons from it. I'd love to hear another example of a challenging moment to bring out in vivid detail these lessons.
One of the biggest challenges of that role was having to manage manage the warehouse and manage inventory, because we held a lot of this client's inventory. And The client, of course, wanted to know where everything was at, when it was at there, you know, when was it installed? When did it come back? How long did it take to fix? All those things. And this warehouse was enormous, and they had a lot more, many more clients than just this client. So, you know, sometimes the inventory got a little mishmash, a little mixed up. Sometimes our people that were working at the warehouse did not scan in certain things. A lot of it was manual. That was also one of the big issues. And I think, you know, I already mentioned it before, it was kind of a software concern. We didn't have the right software to really make our lives easier, especially in the warehouse. We'd have an entire store would close, and this company would send out a couple of technicians to pack up that store, every single piece of technology that they had in the store, and send it to the warehouse. Then the warehouse had to, you know, account for every single piece of equipment that arrived. Well, without like official scanning, there were quite a bit of punching in of numbers, and, you know, mistakes definitely happen in those scenarios. I believe they fixed that issue before I left, but it was messy and it was a nightmare. And the vendor manager expected me to basically fix the inventory problem, fix the problem with us not being able to tell him where their equipment was at, how much they had on hand. And he wanted a very specific report that we had someone working with him. And in other companies, when a client is requesting a report, typically you put a statement of work together, right? And you charge them if there's scope creep. Well, in these scenarios with this client, we just didn't do that. We did not charge them for certain things, such as creating a report. We could never quite get it right though. And it was, I mean, one of the main individuals working on the report would spend his entire 40 hours a week on this report, just to meet on Friday to review it, to make sure that it was what the client was expecting. And we always failed. We always failed because the vendor manager would kind of change his mind, kind of like, well, what if, yeah, I know I asked for this, but what if, could we do this? And yeah, I'm really after this. And so then we would go back the very next week and try to recreate that same report with his little tweaks that never quite came to, he was never quite satisfied. And I think if we had the right kind of software, we probably could have accounted for what he wanted. So, but we never charged him. We never charged him for those hours upon hours of work for this report that never went anywhere.
So there are a couple of powerful points about that, which is people often think about contracts or statements of work like they're useful because they make sure you're paid for what you do. But what this example is bringing out, there's another reason why contracts and statements of work are really powerful, which is they limit and define what you'll do, and including the success criteria that the client will use in order to decide, okay, this is good, you're making it happen. So it's not only that where you not paid for that work, but because there is no contract, it gave the client the ability to say, no, change this, do this, do this, do this. So it could just keep on going on forever without a clear way to end.
Yeah, there were no parameters to him making that request. You know, more than likely a document is usually drawn up and it's so specific, a statement of work is so specific, it'll be like, these are the following fields that you want. You have the pricing of the amount of hours that are scoped out. You have the client sign it. And if they go beyond, they want something else, that's another change control. That's an addition to what they've already agreed to pay. So yeah, exactly. We could have I don't know. It was unfortunate. I really wish I could have done better for the CEO in, I don't know, calling those kind of things out. But there was almost an understanding that this is the way it is. This client runs the show. We give them whatever they ask for, whenever they ask for it, and thank you very much. Like, I never really felt like there was the opportunity to be like, yeah, shouldn't we be charging them for this? Or they even got us to pay for their travel to come down to the warehouse to do an inventory check for their own stuff. And wait,
your company paid for them to go to to see the warehouse of their own stuff?
Yeah.
I want to give props to their procurement department, because they're really able to extract every little dollar out of you guys.
That kind of stuff, and this is interesting because this was done outside of procurement. That kind of stuff was the relationship stuff. Like, hey, could you ask the CEO if maybe he'd pay for so-and-so's ticket to come and work with us on the inventory? So there was already like maybe 2 people going that the company was going to pay for theirs, but they asked if we could pay for additional people, that kind of thing. And we did. And we also paid to take them out for every single meal the entire week we were there. And coolest thing about this job is they liked to take the client to fine dining restaurants, and I could order any wine I wanted. I was a complete alcoholic that entire 2 years, but I drank some really good wine. So that's silver lining.
I had a miserable job with a miserable client that drove me crazy, and I hated it, but I got awesome wine, so I was to be a great alcoholic.
Well, and really, really nice meals, paid for, that I didn't have to pay for, and not restaurants that I would normally just choose to go to. So yeah, that was one of the nicer points of the job. But now working for a company that is not a small company, is a major corporation, they do not, forget it. You can't even charge a cocktail on your, Amex, forget it. Like, you've got to justify every single dime that you use when you're traveling, and treating the client, that takes like pre-approvals. And so yet another huge gap in how this company was managed. I mean, not a lot of complaints there for me because I got to drink really good wine. Yeah.
Okay. So, so interesting that this didn't come from procurement, but from the relationship side. And I think it goes to your point that you opened the podcast with, that companies have cultures, and there's just this culture that permeated the client of just squeezing and getting every little bit out, which apparently they did.
We had some weird circumstances though too, where the vendor manager worked with a lot of other vendors. Of course, we weren't just his only problem. And so there were other vendors that did the same type of work that we did, but he preferred working with us. I have no idea, probably just because he could push us around. But there were some weird things that had happened where we were bidding on a job, and he accidentally sent me what this other company was bidding for this particular job and asked me to just delete it. And I deleted it, but I also, it was after I saw it,
you remembered the bid. I like how you put accidentally in air quotes.
Well, maybe it was, but it just, I don't know. Like, he on the surface, like, he was, I think he really did enjoy working with this particular company, and because the CEO was very charismatic, and So I enjoyed working with him. But yeah, so those kind of fishy little things, or a couple of things like that that happened that I wasn't sure how to take. And I mean, like, I know this isn't even on the line of unethical. It's like across the line and across the finish line actually of unethical. So I don't know, these circumstances were just so new to me. I just had never dealt with something like that before. So I did tell the VP of Ops that, hey, so-and-so sent me this, the quote from this other vendor. Maybe ethically, I should have kept that to myself. I don't know. I think I was so angry at the client that I just, I was looking out for the company at that point. Not sure. However I want to justify it for myself.
Okay, so from my eyes, I've accidentally said things I shouldn't have far too often. In other words, in any negotiation, and not just negotiation, managing people, managing clients,
yes.
there are often things. Yeah, it happens because there are things that would be really, really helpful for the other person to know, but you just can't say. But knowing that we're all human and thus we make mistakes, while I can't say how much the competition is bidding for, I can be a human and make the mistake and then very quickly apologize for the mistake. So just knowing only what it's like, of course he did that on purpose as a way to let you know that, oh yeah, these other guys are bidding low. And by the way, to be like even more cynical, I didn't think I could get more cynical than I am, but apparently I can. Like, it could very well be that the bid he gave for the other guys wasn't even the real bid. He probably just lowered the number by 20% and then shared that.
Yeah, I kind of would not. So, I mean, it seemed shady. It definitely seemed shady. And what's interesting is he sent me this email. I didn't see how it was relevant to me. So I probably filed it away. But then he was like, oh, hold on. I didn't need to send you that. And I was like, oh, really? Scroll down,
yeah.
like.
Now I want to see it.
What did
I'm
you
not supposed to see it.
Exactly?
Now I have to see it.
Yeah, I mean, he could have just let it go, like, oh, whoops, hey, please disregard. I probably would have just deleted it. So interesting.
Actually, thinking about it out loud, he had to have given you a fake, much lower number because that would actually protect his own ass morally. Because if he told you their real number, that's as you pointed out before, that's unethically crossing the line by revealing something confidential from someone else. But if he just makes up a number and attributes it to them, obviously there's an advantage. Then the other client, no one, if it's ever leaked that he did this, he can't be blamed. He's like, I didn't tell her the number. I told her something completely different. So he didn't reveal anything he should have.
That is such a good point. I have never thought of it that way, but I wouldn't put it past him, honestly. But hey, great learning experience. And there were quite a few situations where, someone sent an email that they did not mean for the client to see or for the vendor to see. That kind of stuff really happened a lot at that job. And when I started at a different company, the company had you confirm any time that you sent an email outside of the company. If, like you're sending an external email to this person, should it go to this person?
Yes.
You know what? I think that this company that I worked for before should have made that part of their process. Could have saved a lot of issues.
What's interesting about that is I have an email address at my main client's company at their corporate email, and they have that alert. And like every day, all the emails, I'm always like, why do you always say this for every email? I never thought it was useful, but your point is really good, because there's just a lot of people who are careless in this sort of way.
Yeah, and of course things still happen where you send I don't know, it still happens, but it's a much better safeguard than what they had before. We had a situation where, so the small company that I worked for, they had trouble keeping a CFO. So they're, VP of finance, that role just was kind of a revolving door. And one of our clients that we were dealing with, and it wasn't the client that I normally dealt with, was emailing back and forth with another one of with the client and another vendor. And they didn't realize that one of our employees was on the email, and they were just completely talking trash about this company. And they're like, well, who's the flavor of the month? As far as we introduced a new CFO, right? And they would it was a long chain of just condescending and horrible comments about this company. That kind of thing has not happened in my current role, because I think that everyone just assumes that they need to be professional, and they're dealing with a professional vendor or even a client. I saw some really interesting, definitely crossing the line of unprofessionalism at this company, on both sides, on the vendor side and on the client side.
Wow, these are lots of really good little details that paint a toxic picture. I'm happy you got out, and I hope you're enjoying your current job much more.
It was a very interesting learning experience, for sure. I was only there for 2 years, and I feel like it was a real life lesson. And you can learn one in 2 years. You don't even have to be at a job for that long to really learn some things.
What would you say are the most important lessons that you learned in these 2 years?
Well, I already knew that the client is always right. I mean, that's fine. I already knew that, right? But to the degree that they were right, that tested my patience and my anger. It made me actually improve my level of professionalism and my acting skills. I think that I was, I never responded the way that I actually was feeling, because a lot of things really made me very angry. And I just kept it down. So I don't even know if that's a good thing that I learned. But it does help in the world of business for those individuals who are just starting out. There's a role you sometimes have to play, and it's not you.
Being able to be a good actor is a superpower, and like all superpowers, it can be used for good or used for bad.
Very true, very true. But it was frustrating that that's the superpower I had to try to use, and maybe I wasn't even that good at it. It's probably clear that I was fuming with a pasted smile on my face, but moving on to a different job, I learned how to let those client things go. Like, I would hold on to these things that would make me angry, something that the client said or did that I felt was unprofessional or just plain rude, and I would hold on to that forever. I would retell the story to 10 of my friends and perpetuate that anger in my system. That kind of stuff I don't even hold on to now in this job, because I what's the point? I just don't let it get to me any longer. It's the job just wasn't that important, and I let the drama get to me. And so I think I learned how to separate my emotions from dealing with work issues, just in general.
Wow, that's actually a great way to wrap this up, but that's also a very powerful life lesson where I think part of growing up, adulthood, maturation is, is like the stereotype of like the young college kid that's angry about everything and the injustice in the world and fighting to change the world. And as you get more experience, you realize when you're angry or like over everything, ultimately you can't change the world and you're the one that suffers. So
and everyone around you as well. So
oh yeah, that's right. You and your friends and family, because they're the ones that when you repeat the horrible stories 20 times, repeating the story, they suffer it with you. And part of growing up is learning to let go on these things.
Yeah. There are some stories that I held on from my current role if they're just outrageous, or I find them funny. Like they didn't upset me. I mean, they might have upset me early on or because it was such an outrageous request. But then I saw it as funny and shared it because it was funny. So it definitely has changed the way I at least talk about work as well.
Yeah. So there's always outrageousness, and in a way we kind of live for the outrageousness. It makes a lot of this fun and worthwhile. But I like the word that you used before. I often use the same word, drama, where it's easy to get wrapped up in the drama, but getting too wrapped up in it is destructive. And for me personally, this is one of the lessons, not just of my professional career, but of life and just like relationships, friends, family, girlfriends, and so on, that it's really easy to get in drama, and turning yourself stoic takes a lot of practice.
It does. Perhaps it happens in your 40s.
I am in my 40s, and I'm definitely better at dealing with the drama and letting it go than I was 10, 20 years earlier.
Right. So, see, for your listeners, don't give up hope. It's not something that happens overnight, right? And you do have to live through that and learn your lessons before you get to the point of being able to, that's just no longer important.
Yeah, I agree. And this is a great high level note in order to end it. Thank you for taking the time, Violet. It was these were powerful stories, and at least it helped you grow up.
Yeah, I think that's what we learned today, is that, I mean, it was almost like self-discovery. You're my psychoanalyst, so thank you very much for that experience. I didn't have to pay you for the hour, right?
Come for a podcast to educate younger versions of ourselves. Leave with some psychoanalysis. This is the way it rolls. This is the way it rolls here.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, Violet, and thank you for everyone who is listening. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned as much as I did.